So today we're going to talk about my title, The Market Revolution. A changing economy, changing geography, and changing demographics. Now just for some background information, there's going to be two real significant periods of industrial growth. You're going to have to know both of them very well. This one is period 4. The next one will be the first thing we cover in the second semester in period 6. So this is called the market revolution. That will be called the industrial revolution. Now, if you go over, if you really want to look at it from a historian standpoint, and I put, okay, this is 1800. Who gets elected in 1800? Jefferson, cool. All the way forward, we put 1900 here. So over time, at the bottom of our graph, and I put GDP here. What's GDP stand for? Anybody know? Gross domestic product. How much our country's producing. If you go for it that way, you can kind of look at, with a couple of small drops, we don't really stop a huge increase in industrial capacity. Does that look like one long revolution or two fully separate revolutions to you? Two. I don't see two. Yeah. You see separate? I would argue that if it's separate, it would look like this. Because then you can say there's a lot of growth here and a lot of growth here. I mean, dips are natural. Things don't go like this forever. But you can make a compelling argument that really the entire 19th century is a time of economic revolution in American history. The reason they're really separated is because in the middle of all this, 1860 to 1865, we have a Civil War. So in the middle of all that, we kind of break up the two into market revolution and industrial revolution because of this natural break of the Civil War. But if you look at just gross domestic product, for example, we just really continue on the country does on a huge economic revolution for a whole 100 years. Very, very important. By the end, by 1900, we are arguably the world's greatest economic power. We can't make that statement completely true until post-World War I. But you can make a good arguable argument that by 1900, we've gone from here where we can't even enforce an embargo act because we don't matter, to being the most important economic nation in the world. By then, we're the greatest producer of goods, of steel, of oil, of a bunch of other really important stuff. So a lot's going to have to happen in the next 100 years to get us there. And today really is the start of that conversation. This market revolution, I taught you guys some cool Latin last week. What's some of the cool Latin words I taught you? Antebellum. And what does antebellum mean, if you guys remember? Before conflict. So in that case, it was, remember the Treaty of Ghent gave us status quo antebellum, the world back to what it was before the War of 1812. Going forward in American history, we're going to use this term a lot, especially in period 4 and 5. Anytime you see antebellum in U.S. history, it largely means pre-Civil War. Pre-Civil War. So the market revolution is America's large industrial change in the antebellum years, before the Civil War. It's good to know. The better you guys are with history language, the better off everybody's job is. So there's a lot of important stuff that we're going to cover today. The prompt is here. Luis, can you read first, please, sir? Nice and loud.
Evaluate the causes for the shift in economic development from 1790 to 1860, accounting for short and long-term factors.
Cool. So why do we have a huge shift in what we do economically? Short-term factors, long-term factors. All right. Your outline looks like this. Give you a little look at where we're going and how we're going to get there. We'll start, of course, with the era of good feelings. Coming out of World War of 1812. We'll talk about Clay's American system, what that does for our transportation and our markets. We'll hit the Panic of 1819 quickly while we talk about westward expansion, immigration and nativism, and then this new, in American history at least, this new working class we didn't have before. There's a new class in America because of the market revolution called a wage-earning class. What do you guys think I mean when I say wage-earning? So we haven't had workers in America before this? We have nobody's been working. We've just been chilling.
No, there's like more work.
Talk to me.
Oh, I'm not exactly sure, but isn't it more like when somebody's a wage worker, it's pretty much they have like a set amount that they're supposed to be paid for like each hour, like every time of the
Yeah. And who do they work for?
Factory.
Yeah, bigger picture.
Okay.
They work for somebody else. Prior to this in American history, for the most part, everybody kind of works for themselves, right? They farm, they have a small business, they do their own thing. The Market Revolution is going to give us this new class of wage earners. They just work for a wage. They don't have ownership over their work. They don't own the business. They don't own the product. They just do the work. And we'll look at some good documents at the end of class today about what that looks like in American history and what that does for the class divide, which is really one of the more important parts of period 4. Cool, so let's talk era of good feelings. I ended with this on Thursday in class. What are our good feelings?
Good feeling.
Good feelings. We drank a bunch of post-war whiskey. We did a bunch of post-war drugs. Why do we have this quote-unquote era of good feelings? What's an example of one of these eras of good feelings ideas? Why?
Nationalism.
What?
Nationalism.
Nationalism. Why?
Because they feel proud.
Louder so everyone can hear
Because
you.
they feel proud of who they are now.
Why are we proud of who we are now?
They didn't lose.
We didn't lose! Yeah, America! What's more American than taking great pride in a war that we didn't lose? We may not have won. Cool. The Battle of New Orleans plays a role in this, even though, of course, as you know, it happens after the war is over, because the British forget their ladders. But that key there, that we walk away from the war, like at least knowing that we won the last battle. Yeah, America, Andrew Jackson. Cool. Why else do we have this good? So there's patriotism, nationalism. We see in our art, our culture, people expressing pride in America. What else? Talk to me.
We were more of one party since the Federalists died.
Good. The Federalists died. We're down to one party. So we go from this time period in which we're arguing about everything politically. Arguing about the bank, about constitutional interpretation, about this, about the Anti-Sedition Acts, about the embargo, fighting about everything to a much more united political system. So socially, we're proud of our country. That's an economic, social factor of the arrogant feelings. Politically, the Federalists are dead. There you go. So the arrogant feelings is characterized by a couple of things. Thing one is a very popular president. That helps. James Monroe was elected in 1816 and also in 1820. Very popular. And this new emergence of this new era, this new generation, these new American politicians I'm going to talk about today, that are very popular. They're very engaging. We see political dominance by the Democratic Republicans without any Federalist opposition because the Federalists are dead. They have shot themselves in the foot to death. And we see a more interconnected nation, patriotism-wise, economically more interconnected. Talk about that a lot today. Transportationally more interconnected. Where we start to see our country actually functioning like a country, as opposed to a bunch of disparate parts. We see the country attempting to function as a unified whole, as opposed to north does north, west does west, south does south. Don't worry, we'll revert right back to that after this. Don't you worry. The South will go back to doing southern things. The North will go back to doing northern things, and so forth. But in the short term, we begin to attempt, at least, to try to function like a unified country. So Monroe's elected in 1816, another former Secretary of State. There's another one. With two pretty clear goals. Promote national unity, get us all together on the same page, and to increase and promote America's power in the world. I'm sure you guys read about this. This is the Monroe Doctrine. I'll talk about that on Wednesday. I'll hit 2 things on Wednesday and 2 things only. The Missouri Compromise, which kind of ends this era of good feelings. It's very short. And the Monroe Doctrine. But we'll focus more today on this idea of promoting national unity. We see the Democratic Republicans dominating the presidency and Congress, and we have one party controlling both. It's easy to get things done. Because you're not fighting amongst yourselves in Congress, in the presidency, against Congress and the presidency. So we see a very clear ideology pushing through both things. Now, because the Federalists are dead, are there still Federalists that exist?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the Federalist as a national party is dead. So because of that, we start to see a shift in the political ideology of the Democratic Republic. We'll talk about it a little bit. Monroe was able to put Federalists in his cabinet, Northerners in his cabinet, Southerners in his cabinet, Westerners in his cabinet. Secretary of State, for example, is a Northern ex-Federalist, John Quincy Adams. He's the Secretary of State. Then logically, like everybody else, he makes the jump from state to presidency. But why? Why is Monroe able to do this, for example? Why is he able to put such a wide range of people in his cabinet without worrying about it? Take a stop. I see you thinking. I see that those wheels and that little mouse brain working. Talk to me.
They may not have political unity and have like one shared large-scale goal instead of their own personal agendas. Partially.
Does he need to worry about like Federalist rivals in his cabinet? No, because they're not going to be a threat to his better political power. Because they don't have a large political base nationwide, it doesn't matter. He can be like, Brett is from a different party than me, but Brett has good ideas. I don't need to worry about appointing Brett to my cabinet and then him running for president against me and beating me. Because he represents a party that is dying and dead anyway. So maybe his ideas are good, but he's not a rival. So when we take, this is one of the nice parts about this era, is take the rivalry out of politics, you can get a lot more done. He doesn't look at the other points of view as rivals necessarily, but as potential. And that really gives us our three main players for the next 30 years of American politics: Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Daniel Webster. Yeah, they're all crazy looking dudes. This is cool. Henry Clay is one of the first politicians to get his photograph taken. There's probably the first photograph you've seen in this class. Think about it.
Wait, a picture.
What?
Wait, a picture.
iPhone, it's an 8S. Yeah. So all three of them are going to play a huge role going forward in our politics. None of the three ever get elected president. But that tells us something. That from now until the Civil War, we're not going to have a lot of dominant presidencies. And this happens in American history. You guys wouldn't know it because you've been alive for such a short amount of time. But American politics, the pendulum swings back and forth from a strong executive branch to a stronger Congress. This is one of the eras in American history in which Congress plays a larger role. Congress plays a way more leading role in driving the politics of the antebellum era than the presidency does. For example, and this is a nice little foreshadow to what happens next, we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson at great length for Thursday and Monday of next week. We'll spend 2 full classes on Jackson's presidency. But if you go from Monroe in 1820, for his re-election in 1820, all the way to Lincoln in 1864 when he gets re-elected and then killed. From 1820 to 1864, only one president gets re-elected. Only one president gets re-elected, and it's Jackson. Because we go Quincy Adams, 1 term, Jackson 2. Van Buren 1, William Henry Harrison 1, then he dies. John Taylor 1, Polk 1. Point being that it's a time period in which Congress plays a way more dominant role than the executive branch does. And these three play a huge role in that dominant legislative branch. But not a whole lot of time in this class. I'll spend a bunch of time talking about congressmen and senators. But this is one of the time periods in which that's important. And they're called the era of good feelings, the Great Triumvirate, the great three great leading politicians. And they're all obviously really attractive men. It looks like John C. Calhoun is on methamphetamines, which is lovely. Daniel Webster looks like he's like trying to be like a cute, dreamy, like thoughtful type, but he's overdoing it. Overdoing it. Yeah, he looks Edgar Allan Poe-esque.
Yeah.
He does.
And Henry Clay. Henry Clay is a fascinating man, but nobody ever accused him of being a male model. Now, Clay will become the new John Marshall, not in terms of being on the Supreme Court, but in being somebody in a push that literally just never dies. He's going to run for president in 1824, in 1828, in 1836. Yeah, he's our president. I take the L, go home. Off the top of my head, I know it's at least 4 times. It might just be 4, but he takes a nice 0-4 record to his grave in presidential elections.
Then he never wins.
Yeah, and then he never wins. No, in his last election, he runs against a guy nobody's even heard of, and Polk beats him soundly, and it's kind of sad. So. Anyway, his contributions are large outside of the White House. Now, there's going to be 3 big regions that are worth talking about for today that I need to point out. I kind of went crazy on the map this morning. I apologize. I'm going to erase it now. A lot of lines going on there. We're going to talk about Are you excited about Mississippi?
Miss. Yes.
I am. Good, I'm glad. So, we have the North, the South, and the Greater West. In this era, Henry Clay will be the large chief representative of the Western part of the United States because he's from, anybody know? Is Virginia in the West? Kentucky, yeah. He's a Kentucky.
Right there.
I know, it says it right there. Good job, guys. The place he'll have his biggest role is as Speaker of the House of Representatives. As a nice chance to review. We have our bicameral legislature, yes? The Senate. How many senators does each state get? 2. Good. How about for the House? Based on population. Thank you. Whoever said 1, go in the hallway and cry, please. Based on population. So the person picked as... Ask for focus today. It's not what I'm asking for. The person picked as Speaker of the House is pretty much the guy who runs the House of Representatives. So Henry Clay's going to have a really long run there as influencing legislation and politics as Speaker of the House. We'll talk about him a lot more going forward, don't worry. He's also a huge proponent, a huge pusher of national connective economic development. You guys read about Clay's American system. It's very Hamiltonian, and all he's trying to do is get these 3 regions to function economically together. That the North and the West and the South, despite doing different things in the economy, they should work together like a well-oiled machine. Right? That as one works, it benefits this one, as this one, it benefits that one. A much more national economy. We'll cover that in a little bit. Calhoun is next. Calhoun is much more of a Southern representative. He's from South Carolina, my personal favorite place, as you guys know. He serves as both Secretary of War and as Vice President. He's Vice President for Andrew Jackson from 1828 to 32. And he also serves as a senator for a long, long time. The Senate representative from South Carolina. He becomes a big pusher. This is very important. Very, very important. As the Southern defense of slavery begins building, it is Calhoun who becomes one of the chief architects of what will become known as the positive good defense. That says slavery is fine because it is a positive good for the slave. Yeah, slavery is good because it's better for the slave to be here, being Christianized, being civilized, being developed in this country than they would be at home. That's a very Calhoun-esque argument that we'll actually read next Wednesday when we look at the growth of slavery and the defense of slavery. But he's a huge proponent of states' rights. Interesting. This is the time, it's already begun, but this is the time when we really start having a much more coherent connectivity between pro-slavery arguments and states' rights arguments. Pro-slavery and states' rights. I want you to take 1 minute with your partner and try to get your mind around why. What do those 2 things have in common? Why would pro-slavery defenders begin taking a states' rights approach to their defense of slavery? 1 minute, chat it out, come to a conclusion, go from there. Sure.
I just forgot what I
say in the North?
Okay, people want to protect slaves would be pro states' rights because if the federal government makes a law that prohibits or limits the expansion of slavery, they could notify it and say that it's the states' rights to take care of affairs that involve one of the states. So it's up to them to decide what they want to do.
Sure. Why would they use that state argument to get that?
The state's right to protect slavery, or the federal government, or the federal government is one that slaves, they can protect slaves with their state government.
Oh, okay.
So, this is going to make your life so much easier going forward to get your mind around this now when it's still a small issue. Chavez, talk to me. What's the connection in the two?
Well, I related it back to the Kentucky and Virginia, what was it called?
Resolution.
Yeah.
Good. It's a good place to start.
Because
That's kind of the foundation of states' rights. I dig that.
yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, but what does that have to do with slavery?
Well, because like that one guy was saying like it's good for the slaves. So
Okay.
you could like use that as an argument to say, oh, it's benefiting all of us. We're making money and we're like civilized.
Okay. Well, then what does that have to do with states' rights?
Because the states can argue that it's okay to do that.
But what does that have to do with states' rights? You're there. But we're not quite building that bridge. Brett, talk to me.
Since slavery was kind of a regional or state institution, then the South would have their own choice whether to keep slavery, and then the North would have their choice to adopt it or not.
Okay. What does that have to do with states' rights? Cortez. Nice and loud. Take a shot.
The South has already seen in the amendments that federally, like, they're very against slavery. There's no instances of slavery in new states. They've already seen that federal power doesn't like slavery. So now they have to rely on state power in order to keep it and defend the right to do so.
So, if you begin arguing that your state should have to make all its own decisions, leave my state alone. Then you could make the argument that when the federal government begins to get in the way of slavery, you can argue that it's my state's decision to do so. Any states' rights argument, guys, whether it's about whether to create a national pony or end slavery, any states' right argument is basically just anti-strong federal government argument. That's the same argument. Arguing for states' rights is arguing against a strong federal government. You with me so far? So the argument here then becomes, if I let the federal government do blank, they're going to come from my slaves. If I let the federal government charge me this tax, they're going to come from my slaves. If I let the federal government decide blank, they're going to come from my slaves. Because the Southern thinking and the states' rights argument is if we keep the national government as strong and as limited as possible, it won't matter what the anti-slavery argument is, the federal government will have the power to enforce it anyway. By letting the states decide, you ensure that slavery as a system can succeed because there will always be states that want to keep slavery. But if we let the federal government get bigger and bigger and bigger, then as soon as public opinion changes against slavery, they can regulate slavery. So the states' rights argument is super important because that becomes the foundation of the Southern defense of slavery. Sure, as you guys read, slavery, the peculiar institution, yeah, it's a little outside the norm, yeah, it's not quite in line with American ideals, but it's a Southern institution. Don't interfere with things that happen in the South. Let the South deal with it themselves. Question for you. I already have an example of how states' rights and regulating slavery works in this class we've already talked about. It was very brief. What was it? What is my example that we've already used about slavery and then the states or local rule? Because states' rights is basically just let us regulate us. Anybody? What's an earlier example of this kind of states' rights look at slavery?
Oh, yeah.
The 20-year thing, sure, kind of. We're going to ignore it for 20 years. Yes. That was for the for the regulation of interstate commerce. But when they got rid of that, in 1808, we finally banned the Atlantic slave trade. Who was supposed to enforce that rule? Congress passed it. Who was supposed to enforce it? Kind of. Local governments. Remember? So if you So if you get caught in South Carolina, is South Carolina mad? No. They're like, never do that thing again. Have I made myself clear?
Yes.
So that's an example, though, of the national government can pass a law, but if it's letting us regulate us, it's not going to get regulated. So later, we'll talk about this on Monday of next week. We'll talk about Jackson and our next nullification crisis, like the Virginia-Kentucky resolution. We'll come off with this guy, Calhoun, and it's about a tariff, not about slavery or anything. But their argument is, if we let the governments put this tariff on us, then by their very nature, we give the government the power to take away our slaves. Interesting. And the last dude is Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster is the man. He will serve as a congressman for a long time from Massachusetts. He will serve as Secretary of State for a long time. And he's the polar opposite of Calhoun. And then he's very nationalistic, America first, and he's a strong critic of states' rights. A strong critic of states' rights from Massachusetts. And he'll eventually be very anti-slavery, anti-states' rights, pro-national government regulation. And all three of them are going to live forever.
Oh, so it's like...
Just like John Marshall, not quite that long.
But 3 times.
Yeah, right, but 3 of them. Calhoun dies right after the Mexican-American War. Excuse me, right after Polk's election, so 1848. And then he lives for a long time, and Clay lives for a long time. So they don't always agree, but it's important that they're always, at the end of the day, going to put the country first. Their view of the country first. So as we go through a lot of sectional crises and slavery crises and other crises, it's these three that are going to hold, these three and their generation of politicians that hold things together quite nicely. It's when they die off and the next generation that comes, that's where we get our civil war. When the next generation is more aggressive, more me against you, more us against them, more north against south, and that's where we're going to end up in the Civil War. So politically speaking, we also see an evolution of the Democratic Republicans after the War of 1812. And I'll show you why. So let's talk about traditionally, we had our 2 parties, yes? What are our 2 parties? Cool, so we'll put on the left, the Federalists, they're a little more on the liberal side of things. The Democratic Republicans, more conservative in terms of like use of government power. What are the Federalists all about? What kind of interpretation?
Government power.
Loose interpretation, strong national government,